what's at trial here? I mean, we know that the murder took place. They're not denying that they murdered him, but they're trying to justify it on antiquated policies or practices, you know, that were back in medieval times in regards to citizens' arrest and then self-defense. But they chased him down. And when you corner someone, anyone's going to try to fight back because it's about survival. So, I mean, again, I'm concerned about the jury selection as well. There's nothing we can do at this point. But I really hope that the jury looks at what they're being shown. And as you indicated, very graphic video that as a African-American woman or biracial American woman, it's very difficult for me to watch as I have an African-American son.
Dr. Hodo, you mentioned an antiquated policy, the citizens arrest law, which we know is no longer in place there in Georgia. That has been repealed. This is following the death of Ahmaud Arbery at this point. And it's very interesting you brought that up because just yesterday, we know one of the first officer to arrive on scene, Ricky Minshew, he was on the stand and questioned about that. He said he was asked, when you arrived to the scene, did either Travis McMichael or Gregory McMichael, which are two of the three defendants that were there on the scene at the time when he talked to him, he said, did either of them mention citizens arrest, that they were making a citizens arrest at the time? And his exact words were, no, ma'am. We know that is a key point in the defense's case. So that was interesting that that came out just yesterday. But again, we are just hearing from the state's witnesses thus far. Things have just begun. This is just day 3 about to begin again at 9 o'clock this morning in this trial. And for those of you just joining us right now, you're watching First Coast News' online coverage of the murder trial in Brunswick, Georgia. 3 men right now are on trial for murder in the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery. And joining us right now, who you see there on your screen, is Dr. Tammy Hodo, who's with All Things Diverse here in Jacksonville. Dr. Hodo, let's get a little bit into your background, because your thing, what you're fighting for, is to drive for change, for diversity and inclusion, not just here, but all across the board. So let's get into that, your main goal.
So my main goal is really to, and I know this sounds very naive to people, but to actually create an equitable society. And I hear people use equality and equity interchangeably, but they're not the same. Equality is assuming that we're all starting at the same vantage point, where equity is recognizing justness and fairness, and that those historical policies and practices that have impeded certain groups from being able to rise to the occasion where others have been able to. So just really educating people about that social construct of race and recognizing that race is not biologically real. We are all ethnic beings, and teaching them how to engage with other people, whether it be based on sexual orientation, social economic status, sexual identity or ethnicity, religion, and really trying to create this beloved community and thinking about it in the way that we all want to thrive and survive, you know. And right now, many in our minorities communities, we're just surviving. We're not thriving like we should be. And that's problematic to me, and that's what I want to change.
What was interesting on day 1 of opening statements, which was last week Friday, I remember the prosecution in her opening statement said that what happened here in the case of Ahmaud Arbery's death was that you had a group of people making assumptions about Ahmaud as they saw him in this neighborhood running at the time. That was her defense. That is something that was said, and I want to get your take on that. Again, that it was simply based on assumptions, what they assumed about this man that led to his death. Obviously, we've all heard the same thing. They thought that he was a thief in the neighborhood because they said they had saw a string of burglaries in the area prior to this incident happening. So your take on that, Dr. Hodo?
So I find it rather interesting. And the first responder, they asked him that yesterday, and he said that he had not responded to a lot of cases there in that regard. So to me, that kind of goes against what they're saying. And then they also have spoken about other people going into that same property, looking around, and that assumption. And what it truly is that bias and that criminalization of Black bodies, particularly Black males. And so the assumption that tends to be associated with them is that they're criminals. We know 1 out of 3 African-American men, sadly, will be under the control of the criminal justice system in America. While we only make up 5% of the world's population, we incarcerate 25%, with the vast majority of them being Black and brown men for nonviolent drug offenses. And so the assumption that they have, I think we see quite often as we still see people crossing streets to avoid African-American men. We saw this with Trayvon Martin, or the over-policing by citizens who have no right really to try to engage or tell people where they should or should not be. But we continuously see those videos where they're telling
Recording
people,
in progress.
You don't belong in this neighborhood. You should not be here. And it's just like, how do you get to decide who gets to be in a neighborhood and whether they're suspicious or not? But that suspicion was truly based on just the beautiful complexion of his skin.
I had a chance to sit down with Ron Davis a couple of weeks ago. That story actually aired this morning on Good Morning Jacksonville. You see it again this afternoon on First Coast News and again at noon. And he spoke with me about the fact that normally you don't see convictions in these types of cases unless there is video. Now, in his particular case, his son, Jordan Davis, he was shot and killed at a Southside gas station back in 2012 here in Jacksonville. It became known nationally as the Loud Music case. Jordan lost his life at just 17 years old. But I spoke with Ron, and he said he couldn't believe that the jury actually found Dunn guilty of murdering his son. You know, his legs at the time quivered. He couldn't stand up. He couldn't believe when he heard guilty. But in this particular case, with Ahmaud Arbery's case, according to Davis, he is saying that the video is so compelling, he believes that in the end, the Arbery family will get justice.
I'm hopeful that that is indeed what happens. But again, I'm very concerned. Reality is that we all have biases, and similarity bias is something that happens where we tend to engage with people who look like us, maybe come from the same social economic status, political affiliation, or religion. And when I look at the jury, I see people that are not really representative of the victim of this crime. And so that's a bit concerning, but the videos that they are showing are very graphic. And I agree, the first responder, indicated when he came, which is astonishing to me that he didn't even offer CPR, any type of assistance to Ahmaud. But then he also stated that they never made that claim at that point, that he, it was a citizen arrest or that he was burglarizing or anything of that. But all of a sudden, that's the defense now. And I think it's just the justification for what I would call really, like a modern day lynching. They chased this young man down. He was minding his own business, and they cornered him and they killed him.
That first responder Dr. Hodo just mentioned is the former police officer Ricky Minshew, who took the stand yesterday on day 2 of this trial, day 2 of the witness testimony in this trial. Now, Ricky Minshew did say that when he got to the scene, he did not render aid, and he says the reason for that was because he was the only officer on the scene at that point. He didn't get a chance to assess the situation. He didn't have any other officers there to watch his back, as he says, and he also did not have the proper medical aid with him in order to render aid to Ahmaud Arbery as he was on the ground. Again, bloody, the images, we all saw them as he was dying at that point. He also did say that it appeared as if he was not responsive, but he did call an EMT. So we just want to clarify that, the reason why Ricky Minshew said that he did not render aid to Arbery at that point. But even that, we heard from Arbery's mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, shortly after when she was able to come out of the courtroom. She couldn't believe it that someone saw her son there just lying on the ground and did not help him. But again, that was the reasoning why we were told by the officer at the time. Ricky Minshew is no longer an officer, by the way, but that's the reason why he said he was not able to help there.
And Keith, I'm sorry if I can just interject. I'm prior military, and while I'm not an attorney, and I know Attorney Middleton is doing a phenomenal job assessing everything here, but I struggle, because I do have a bachelor's in criminal justice. I did probation and parole, and not to secure the people who were part of this killing. It was amazing to me not to separate people, the shotguns on the ground, but he didn't seem to be fearful of those people. But we've seen other instances where people have not had weapons, where there's been this fear or this excuse or the ideal of someone, becoming hulking up or becoming like a super person in regards to their strength and being concerned. And so to me, I guess I still struggle with that, him not separating people, him not trying to offer or render any aid, and just the friendly interaction that he had with the three individuals when he came upon the scene.
You mentioned that the first person yesterday who took the stand, investigator Sheila Ramos, another something that I do want to mention, some would call it an issue with the Glynn County Police Department. She described the graphic picture she took when she arrived on scene. She did not take any photos of Travis McMichael's truck, which we know was used in this deadly incident. She says she didn't know the particulars of the case at that time. But as you mentioned, if you speak with people who are familiar with the criminal justice system, they will tell you that they take pictures of all of the evidence on the scene. But again, that's what happened in the end here. We do have this video, though, the video that was released showing you exactly what happened at that day, that time that led to Ahmaud's death. Now, I want to mention this as well because the video is key. Again, I got a chance to speak with Jordan Davis's father, Ron Davis, and he mentioned George Floyd, that case, as being on the heel of that. And he says really the outcry from that case, he believes, will likely trickle down to what we're seeing out there in Brunswick and may possibly help in the Arbery's case at this point. Your thoughts on that?
I would have to agree. I think that America is having another awoken moment in regards to racial equity and disparities. And I think with the obvious murder of George Floyd on camera, for everyone to see and the effects of that, and we've seen new legislation, we've seen a lot of courageous conversations beginning to take place surrounding that social construct of race. So I do agree with Mr. Davis that that may indeed be favorable for the Ahmaud Arbery family in regards to the outcome of this trial.
And for those who want to separate race from this case, this trial, it's difficult when you think of all of the facts that we know thus far, the things that evidence has been presented, because we also heard from William Roddy Bryan. He spoke with an investigator. He's one of the defendants, by the way. He's the gentleman who took the cell phone video of this incident happening. We know that he testified to an investigator that Travis actually, as he stood over Ahmaud's body, he called him an N-word. I mean, you hear something like that and you think to yourself, okay, race does play a factor in this. But again, I've noticed just watching prosecution, the state, they have not really used race as a factor as yet. But I believe it will slowly make its way into this case because of the evidence that we're seeing, what we do know so far, the facts of this case.
Yeah, and I would have to agree. And they were referring to him as the black male. You know, we heard that conversation, the black male. You know, and his body laying there. And we know also they've shared that other people were well known to go within that property and just look around. It was a new construction site. And no one called the police on them, nor did they attempt a citizen arrest. The assumption was that they were okay, but there was one substantial difference, and that was the color of their skin. And that, again, is a problem. And reality is America was founded on this ideology of the social construct of race and people of color being inferior, which is not true, but is something that is very much ingrained still in a lot of our policies and practices.
If you're just now joining us, you're watching First Coast News' online coverage of the trial of three men currently on trial for murder. This is in Brunswick, Georgia. This is connected to the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery, at 25 years old, was shot and killed in the Satilla Shores neighborhood of Brunswick, Georgia. He was suspected by the defendants of being a thief in their neighborhood. That led to an altercation and ultimately his death. Right now, we are going into day 3 of witness testimony. The court is set to resume at 9 a.m. this morning. We're now talking to Dr. Tammy Hodo with All Things Diverse. Tammy, you and I were talking offline before we got started to talk with this chat, and we spoke about healing that will be needed within that community. When you talk to anyone, it doesn't matter from what their background is, economic background, they'll talk about the social construct of things there in Brunswick, and they'll say there's a lot of underlying issues when it comes to race that are now coming to light, things that people did not really want to talk about, but they're being confronted with this. So let's talk about that healing. Where do they go from here?
Well, racial healing and reconciliation is something that is very important. And last month, along with 90 Forward, One Jacks, and the Jacksonville Urban League, as well as the Diocese of the Episcopalians in Florida, we were able to host a 2-day virtual conference on racial healing and reconciliation, and recognizing that we need to do some soul searching in our country in regards to that social construct, because we have to heal. And racial trauma is real, and it's generational, and it just continues to repeat itself. And it just tends to morph into different ways that we continue to see this inequity and these disparities. And in order for us to heal, we have to have those courageous conversations. But we're seeing a lot of government entities not wanting to have the conversation about the true history of America. It is never about shame or guilt. It is about empathy and understanding and recognizing why some groups are still behind other groups because of policies and practices that impeded their ability to, again, fully develop. So we have to have the healing, but in order to have the healing, we have to have the real, raw conversations and have that vulnerability-based trust where people understand we're not attacking one another, but I need you to put yourself in my mental shoes and understand, why do I have to track my African-American son who's away at college? Although we have reared him correctly, he graduated from Episcopal School of Jacksonville. He's on an academic scholarship, but even though he knows how to behave, that doesn't guarantee me his safety, because it depends who he engages with. We saw that with Jordan Davis. We saw that with Trayvon Martin, and now we see that with Ahmaud Arbery. So this is just very problematic, but it's a conversation or conversations that must take place if we are ever to move our country and move the needle when it comes to race relations.
You mentioned the event that was recently had, led by All Things Diverse and several groups within Jacksonville, an event to start that racial healing. Something similar took place in Glynn County just a few weeks ago, around the same time that we had it here in Jacksonville. So they too are trying to move forward, especially on the heels of what's going on now with this case. Your suggestion, because a lot of people may be listening and not truly understand what is going on here and the racial undertones, what's happening in that county, really all across the nation. If you can't explain it, what is happening?
Well, what is happening is we're, again, at a point where we can pivot and make a decision as a society that we want to have equitable outcomes, equitable opportunities. But we're going to have those uncomfortable conversations. And it's not just people will say, well, that happened, 40 or 50 years ago. But we're continuously seeing the effects of that inequality. Is it's a vicious cycle, and so in order to do that, we have to deconstruct and look at historically what has happened. And again, it's not about guilt or shame, but it's to ensure that we do not repeat the same things. And so we need to come to an agreement as a society that we want to afford everyone the same opportunity. And we know that some people are starting behind, but we have to remove those systemic barriers to be able to allow them to move to the next level. So I think we're at a pivotal point in our society, and we really need to decide how we are going to continue on.
If you're just now joining us, you're watching First Coast News' online coverage of the trial of 3 men. Currently, they are charged with murder in the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia. And on the line right now with us is Dr. Tammy Hodo with All Things Diverse. The reason we have her here is because race obviously is a factor in this case. Some may not want to say that, but it's obvious the underlying tones in what's going on in this case. So we know that at about 9 this morning, court is set to resume. This is going to be day 3 of testimony. Just yesterday, we heard from 3 law enforcement officers, their take on what happened that day when Ahmaud Arbery lost his life. One of the most, I don't want to say jarring, but something a lot of people are talking about. One of the testimonies that came from the first responding officers, his name is Ricky Minshew. He mentioned that he did not render aid to Ahmaud Arbery when he arrived on scene. And his reason for that, He said that he didn't have any other officers there to watch his back at the time. He wasn't able to assess the situation that quickly. He also didn't have the proper aid with him in order to help Ahmaud, possibly, and he believed that he was unresponsive at that time. Now, Dr. Hodel, you were in the military yourself, and you didn't quite agree with that argument that we were told by Minshew. Why is that?
Well, and not only was I in the military, I have an undergrad in criminal justice and did probation and parole for the states of Georgia and Oklahoma. And reality is that you want to secure the scene, and you need to separate the people who are at the scene so they're not able to come up with a story. You want to separate them, and he should have. Ideally, I would have handcuffed everybody, went ahead and separated them, and then provided aid. And that would have been the simplest thing, that he could have done. It may have taken a minute or two. If he doesn't have, he'll have one set or two sets of handcuffs. He has zip ties, which he could have used. I would have separated all three, put them on the floor in different locations or on the ground. And then I would have went and tried to render aid to this man on the ground who's gasping. And he said that he heard that gasp. And he's heard that before, as if someone's taking their final breath. So it makes me question. I mean, could he have survived? I don't know. His body was riddled with shotgun pellets. He was shot, as per my understanding, with a shotgun 3 times.
There were 3 shots to hit him, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so that's what I would have done. And I think that most professionals in that environment, and then his just friendly dialogue with the suspects was pretty astonishing to me. And just to leave this young man's body laying there as he's bleeding out is just amazing. And I understand not having necessarily the right tools, but you can, take a shirt, make a tourniquet. You can do a variety of things in order to try to stop the breathing. You could lift his head up, to make sure he's getting air. There are a variety of things that could have been done. So I just don't agree with what he said.
For those who don't agree, as we know, that's simply his assessment. He said that's what happened at that point. Now, Dr. Hodel, I do want to get your take because we only have a couple more minutes before we allow folks to tune into day 3 of testimony in this trial. Court is set to resume again at 9 o'clock this morning. Your take overall, your assessment of how things are going thus far and moving forward, your thoughts on things.
So I'm hopeful. I do hear a lot of conversations about the black guy, them referring to cornering him, which leads me to believe that this was very intentional. And I'm hopeful, though, that the jury is looking at it from a humanity perspective and thinking, and trying to identify with Ahmaud as well as his family, and having to see those videos, which are very graphic, and see just the what I perceive as the differential treatment of the suspects who committed this crime. So I'm hopeful that things will go in the favor of the Arbery family. But I've seen things like this before, as we all have, and what we often expect may not be the ultimate outcome. So.
And your message, Dr. Hodel, to that community as the people there within Glenn County try to heal from all of this?
They need to begin to have those real conversations. They need to have conversations surrounding that social construct of race. I would recommend that the religious community, which knows about the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King spoke about, begin to engage community members in open forums and explain some of the institutional and historical policies and practices, and begin to create community there where they all recognize that they are together. And that we're all stronger together versus being separated based on social class or, race or any other variable. We as a society are stronger together.
You mentioned coming together and the groups, their religious groups. I can tell you there's a Glenn Clergy for Equity, a group of about 50 clergymen within Glenn County. They have come together. So there are a number of groups that are trying to begin that healing process. Some of them have been out there every day through the beginning since it's been almost four weeks now. They've been out there praying with people. Even ahead of all of this, they prayed to set the tone for this trial to keep things peaceful, which it has been overall. We've seen it been a really peaceful situation. Most of the demonstrators, it appears, who are out there have been down to Brunswick several times since it started. You'll see a lot of signs of people holding, saying justice for Ahmaud. everything, again, at this point does appear to be peaceful, and there are groups out there, again, trying to begin that healing process. Again, folks, if you're joining us just now, you have been watching First Coast News' online coverage of the trial of 3 men accused of murder in the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery there in Brunswick, Georgia. And our guest this morning was Dr. Tammy Hodel with All Things Diverse. Dr. Hodel, I want to thank you again for joining us. We do appreciate your time, and we're going to go ahead and turn things over now, because we do know court is set to resume in less than a minute right now at 9 o'clock. We are now in day 3 of witness testimony. We're going to see more people from the state, more witnesses put on the stand and questioned, and we're going to bring you everything, all of the updates throughout the day on firstcoastnews.com, our First Coast News app, YouTube as well, and of course on channel 25.2. So again, we're going to go ahead and turn things over to court, set to resume right now at 9 a.m. Thank you, Dr. Hodel. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.